Hey guys, so today we're going to review for your test. So I want us to work through these few problems for me. So I want to just kind of go step by step here. So this one says, let sine of alpha be equal to 4/5. And alpha is going to lie between pi over 2 and pi. And cosine of beta is going to be equal to 5/13. And beta is going to be in between 0 and pi over 2. Find the exact value of cosine of alpha plus beta and sine of 2 alpha. Alright, so sine, remember, is y over r. Cosine is x over your r. And alpha is going to lie in between pi over 2 and pi. So alpha is going to be in quadrant 2 here. So here would lie your alpha here. So this would be 4 and this would be 5. So if I needed to find x here, so I'd say 25 minus 16, right? So it'd be x squared plus 4 squared is equal to 5 squared. So 25 minus the 16, which is a through 9, which is x will be equal to 3, but I'm in the second quadrant, so it's going to be a -3. So that means that cosine of alpha is going to be equal to -3 over 5. Right, and then cosine of beta here, so beta is going to lie in between 0 and pi over 2, so that's going to be in the second quadrant. So this is going to be 5 and 13 here, so we can find y, so it'll be 5 squared plus a y squared is equal to 13 squared, so that's 13 squared. 144, so that is going to be a 12. So that means sine of beta is going to be equal to 12 over a 13. Good deal? Okay. So cosine of alpha plus beta is going to be sine of alpha, cosine of beta. It's always the opposite sign, so it's going to be minus and then your signs. So sine of alpha, sine of beta. So cosine of alpha here is going to be a -3 over a 5. And cosine of beta is going to be 5 over a 13. And then sine of alpha is 4 over a 5. And then sine of beta is going to be 12 over a 13. So that's going to be a -15 over a 65. And that's a 48 over a 65. So that's a what? -63 over a 65. Alright, sine of 2 alpha, so this is double angle, so it's going to be 2 times sine of alpha, cosine of alpha. So this is going to be 2 times 4 over 5 times cosine of alpha, which is a -3 over a 5. So that's going to be a -24 over a 25. Yep. Alright, y'all look at these for me. So these are verifying our identities. Remember, we've done a bunch of these. So this first one here is cosine of x, cosecant of x. I want to show that's equal to cotangent of x. And this one's 1 minus cosine squared x over 1 plus sine x. I want to show that that's all equal to just a sine of x. So take a minute and try to work through those. Alright, so always take the more complicated side. So cosecant is 1 over sine. And then this is just over a 1 here. So this is, it would be cosine of x over sine of x. And then cosine of x over sine of x is just going to be equal to cotangent. Right, this one over here, more complicated side, so I want to take this side and get it to equal to a sine. So that means I would need to get a common denominator. So my common denominator is just going to be this 1 plus a sine of x. Okay, when I get this together, I'll have 1 plus sine of x minus a cosine squared of x, and this is all over a 1 plus sine of x. All right, well, if I had this right here, I could turn this cosine squared of x into cosine squared. Remember, we've got cosine squared plus sine squared is equal to a 1. So cosine squared is going to be equal to 1 minus a sine squared. Right? So this is the Pythagorean identity. So I can plug in for that cosine squared of x, I can plug in a 1 minus a sine squared. So, this is a 1, 2, sorry. So 1 plus sine of x minus a 1, and this minus and a minus turns into a plus. Alright, so my 1's are going to go away, so I'm going to be left with sine of x plus sine squared of x all over 1 plus sine of an x. So I can factor out there a sine. So if I take out sine of x, I'll be left with 1 plus a sine of x. And then 1 plus sine of x can go away, so I will be left with sine of x is equal to sine of x. Whew. That was a lot. Okay, and then the other things that we have done have been to solve some trig equations. So I gave you 2 that were a little bit more complicated, so I wanted to using identities here, so just try to do this one as best as you can. Alright, so here, this is the double angle identity. So if I expanded this, so it'd be 2 sine of x times cosine of x. When I get that, then I have a cosine of x that I can factor out. So if I factor out that cosine of x, I will be left with a 2 sine of x plus a 1 there. And then I'll be able to set both of those equal to 0. So where is cosine of x going to be equal to a 0? And then where is 2 sine of x plus 1 equal to a 0? Which it's going to be, where is sine of x equal to a negative 1/2. Okay, so where is cosine of x going to be equal to a 0? So that will be what? A pi over 2 and a 3 pi over 2. And then where sine of x is going to be equal to a negative 1/2, so it's going to be 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. Check your answers. but all of those are going to work. So these are your 4 answers there. Okay, all right, so secure. So we've got 2 sine squared x plus a cosine of x, so is equal to a 1 here. So I need to get these in terms probably of just cosine here. So Pythagorean identity, remember? So it's sine squared plus cosine squared is going to be equal to a 1. So sine squared is going to be equal to 1 minus a cosine squared. So we'll have 2 times 1 minus a cosine squared plus a cosine of x is equal to a 1. So I'll have 2 minus a 2 cosine squared plus a cosine. So if I move everything to one side here, I move everything over here because this becomes a positive. So this will become a positive 2 cosine squared x minus a cosine of x minus a 1. So I'll have to factor this. So I'll have a 2 cosine of x for sure, and then I'll have just a regular cosine of x. So one needs to be a minus a 1, and then the other one needs to be a plus. So 2 times 1 is 2, negative 2, so that'll give you a negative 1. 1 times a negative 1 is a negative 1. So set those equal to each other. So 2 cosine of x plus a 1 is equal to a 0, and cosine of x minus a 1 is equal to a 0. So cosine of x is going to be equal to a negative 1/2, and cosine of x is going to be equal to a 1. So here we've got, where is cosine of x going to be equal to a negative 1/2, which is going to be a 2 pi over 3, and a what? Around 4 pi over 3. And where is cosine of x going to be equal to a 1, which is going to be a 0. So check your answers to just make sure that they are correct, and they will be correct. Okay, so just simplifying some trig functions, using your double angles, your half angles to simplify, verifying identities, simplifying some identities, so just simplifying some functions down, and then solving some trig equations is everything that's going to be on your test. So if you have any questions about anything, let me know. Y'all have a wonderful, wonderful day.